Nubian kings saved Egypt from foreign occupation, and they ruled as Egyptian pharaohs for quite some time. Today we will be learning more not only about the history of ancient Nubia, but about also its culture and traditions up to modern days. Joining me now is Mr. Samir Abbass. He's an Egyptologist and a Nubiologist. Welcome, Mr. Samir.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. I think it's a very interesting topic. There's so much to know about this part of Egypt. Unfortunately, including myself, I haven't had the chance to go and visit Nubia, so I would want to know from you more about the culture of this area and what are the traditions, what are the people like, how do they go on with their daily lives? Where would you like to start?
So, first of all, I'm very happy that you've done a very good homework, for planning for this talk, because most of the people, when they hear about the Nubia, normally they don't understand where Nubia exactly lies, So, as you described, Nubia is not only existing in Egypt, is existing in Sudan as well. And that's why 6 years ago I had a deep interest not only in visiting Nubian sites in Sudan, is actually leading groups, tours in Sudan as well. So, I'm very happy because you talked about the history timeline as well, but if we talk about the history timeline about the civilization of Africa, of North Africa in Egypt and Nubia and Sudan, there is a very important site to mention, which is Nubia and the Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. So normally when I mention the Stonehenge for many of my European friends, it comes to their minds the English one. Is that right? The one in the UK, which is nearly 4,000 years old. Mm. The Stonehenge I'm talking about is Stonehenge, lies in the middle of nowhere in the desert, 100 kilometers to the west of Abu Simbel Temple in Egyptian ground. Our Stonehenge, if the English Stonehenge is nearly 4,000 years old, our Stonehenge is 7,000 years old.
Mm. Now, would you tell us more about that Stonehenge? How is it like? Because in England, that's more like several pillars, vertical and horizontal one. What about the ones here in Egypt? Is it a type of a temple?
No, it is a very sophisticated astronomical device to predict the rain season, the cultivation season, and the harvest season. So the question is, where is the Stonehenge now? And how many Egyptians seen the Stonehenge? And how many visitors the Stonehenge, our Stonehenge, which is 3,000 years older and even more important in the history timeline than the UK or the British one. Mm-hmm. There is, in the last year, the English Stonehenge received 1.3 million visitors. Our Stonehenge lies in the garden of the Nubian Museum in Aswan, and even the guards of the museum there, most of them, they don't know the location of the Stonehenge when you go and ask them. Mm-hmm. So, the Stonehenge is a very important to begin talk about the history of Africa in Egypt and Nubia as well. Mm-hmm. Because the Stonehenge is actually, that was a result of a very sophisticated civilizations before people to start living with the Nile Valley in Egypt and in Sudan.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So before people, they have been called Egyptians and Nubians as well. Mm-hmm. There is the origin of one of the oldest important African civilization. And when it comes to the ancient Egyptian civilizations, it was stripped out from its African root. We are in Africa, and our water comes from Africa. And that's why this topic, this historical topic, is very important for us because, unfortunately, most of our focus now is to the north, not to the south. The south, that's where our water comes from, and this is where our fertile soil comes from as well. And the ancient Egyptian kings, thousands of years ago, as early as the Old Kingdom, 4,500 years ago, they have a deep interest in Nubia and North Sudan, as you mentioned, for trade purposes, for gold, because it's the land of the gold, that's most of the ancient Egyptian gold come from, and also for strategic importance as well. And some of the early missions to explore the Nile River and the tributaries is come from ancient.
Yes, we can see photos live on air now. So maybe you can describe to us a little bit what this map is.
So, if the footage is displayed according to the numbers, which is already planned, so the first one, that will be a map of Sudan, which is, and the second one, if we, Sudan is a very large country, and the second one, if we can move to that, that is our main interest, and that is the one which is showing the Nile Valley from Aswan to Khartoum in North Sudan. And that's where the 6 cataracts, you're talking about the 5th cataract, and that's where Nubia, which is nearly from the 1st to the 4th and 5th
I think, is that the Stonehenge you were talking about?
That is the third picture, exactly. There's the third picture. There's a Stonehenge I'm talking about, which is the one which is nearly 7,000 years old, 5,000 BC. We can use that, so if we can use that for promoting, for people to come to Egypt, so we can easily promote to Egypt and Nubia based on the Stonehenge. Took this picture myself. I was very lucky. That was nearly 2 weeks ago. I was leading a group of archaeologists in Sudan. I took it 2 weeks ago, and that was in a site known as Western Defufa, so Eastern Defufa, and that is in Karma halfway between the Egyptian border and the capital Sudan.
It was in the embryo position, so would you talk to our viewers more about such a position for the burials in ancient times?
So these burials is as old as 4,500 years old, from one of the most genuine civilization in sub-Sahara Africa, known as the Fufa civilization. Unfortunately, they haven't written down their spoken language, so we can learn more about them. But we found in just one cemetery, which is a cemetery, this picture has been taken in 30,000 graves.
Okay.
And they left huge buildings behind. If we move to the photos, just 2 photos before that, one of them showing the grave style, and the one before showing a huge mud brick building. Just 2 photos before that, and showing the huge mud brick building that is called the Fufa, and that's spread all over Sudan. By the way, just across from the Egyptian border, near Abu Simbel, 1 hour drive. You go to Sai Island. In Sai Island, you find the tombs, some of the tombs of Karma as well.
Yeah. Now, that would bring us to the Nubian Sea, as we call it, or the sites, the temples from behind the high dam, which we consider that's the area of Nubia, which has been submerged under the water. Now, there are so many monuments over there, of course, due to Lake Nasser. Most of them now are under the water, but some have been salvaged. So would you talk to us about such an area, because you're mentioning some of the sites?
So when we talk about the Nubia, so we can classify the Nubian history into three main sections. The first section, that was when we had the Defufa. We talked about the Defufa already. The second section, that's the second stage, which is very important and very much related to the ancient Egyptian kingdom, because that's when the ancient Egyptian governments decided, from the 18 and 19 dynasty, to get the Nubians Egyptologist, which is other words, adapting the ancient Egyptian religion, writings and beliefs as well. And that's how we come across to Jebel Barka, and that's how we come across to some of the statues and the pyramids we are seeing right now. The pyramids we are seeing now, they are not in Egyptian.
This is the Mauryan civilization?
That's exactly, and Meroe civilization, the only way to know about Meroe civilization, because they wrote down their history in hieroglyphics. And there are another type of writing which has been used in Marathi but not deciphered yet. So these pyramids, there is only one field in North Sudan. There is more than 100 pyramids. The number of the pyramids in Sudan, nearly 300 pyramids, which is more than double of the pyramids in Egypt, by the way. But these started building pyramids after we stopped building pyramids. Some of my Sudanese friends will have a different story, but we are talking accurately from history point of view.
I have a question here. Now, are they all related to the Kushite rule of Egypt, 25th dynasty, or they were even before that, so they were more of the local rulers of the area of Kush alone?
I'm very happy because they know the Kushite rule of Egypt. Egyptian dynasties, like 30 or more, and dynasty 25 is the dynasty we are talking about, that was the most important king in the dynasty is Ba'ankhi and Tarhaka. And Ba'ankhi, he decided to lead the Sudanese army, and by the way, the statues we have just seen on the screen, before, that was not for Egyptian kings, that was Sudanese kings, but adapting the ancient Egyptian culture and religion. And he decided to lead the Sudanese army to liberate Egypt, because Egypt at that time was controlled by a Libyan dynasty. So that is a result of hundreds of years, which is the ancient Egyptian government was investing in Sudan, to give them respecting Egypt and the ancient Egyptian religion of Egypt. And when Egypt had a problem, that's what you said, when Egypt had a problem, so the Sudanese kings came to liberate Egypt, and they have no interest in taking over Egypt, to rule from here. So, in the importance of the history of Nubia, and especially not just talking about the Nubian part of Egypt and Sudan as well, is we need to find ways to operate tours and get people interested to see the both parts, because there is a natural extensions of these civilizations in North Egypt, and there is many temples built by the ancient Egyptian kings, like Abu Simbel temple, which is the biggest temple built in the Nile Valley in Nubia. But if you cross the border like 50 or 100 kilometers to the south from Abu Simbel, you will find Solib, you will find Sadenga, you will find Kaiwa, you will find many other sites, Jabal Barkal as well, many other sites which has ancient Egyptian temples. The big threat now is, as the high dam is built in Egypt and there is monument has been submerged, there is dams being built in Sudan now. And there is a global race now, in order to save many of the monuments in Sudan, because unfortunately the governments haven't made sure that they will rescue the monuments first before building the dams. And that's happening in Sudan now.
Yeah, before we run out of time, speaking of adaptations and speaking of today's Nubia culture, let us get to know more about how is Nubia area very different from the rest of the part of Egypt. Tell us more about their tradition and what the culture is like today.
So there is one significant difference between, which makes the Nubians in ancient time, even slightly like today, different than the ancient Egyptians, is the language. The language is spoken in ancient Nubia.
So even till today, Nubians, they have a different accent and language in general.
Different language, different accent,
okay.
Different language. But the good news is, so the Arabic is the main language for the Nubians, and those the conservative among them, they still practicing, they still speaking their mother tongue. And the only thing which is poor, by the way, Egypt and Nubians together, that when Islam was spread in the Nubian lands, not before. Before that, there was clashes, and that was. Most of the time it was ancient Egyptians having control over the Nubian lands by military or by culture influence and religious influence.
Actually, it's worth mentioning that actually the Nubian language played, or dialect played an important role in the 6th of October War, because that was the secret language and codes used, because very few people knew about it. So actually it was the one utilized in the war, and that was another.
And that's why Israel shortly after they started intensive courses to study the Nubian language. So we cannot use it again.
Now, actually, the Nubian people have been they've been resettled from their areas up to the areas of Aswan up to Komombo, and even they even left to Cairo, Alexandria, and so on and so forth. But if we look at the life in the settlements, like in Suhail, Gharb Suhail, and so on in Aswan, we can still find the traditional Nubian life still there. So what's some of the most characteristic feature of the community, the Nubian community in Aswan?
So language, songs, art, building style, colors, dressing code, lifestyle, and they are very social people, so they are, you cannot tell how social they are until you attend their weddings.
And they have also very different music that, is very, and a folklore, you will always know it's Nubian when you hear it.
So, and the question now, so if in our approach to the Nubian file or the Nubian subject, if we are approaching that in a way that, to help them to go along with Egypt, do you think, I think that will be the best approach, so not just the Nubians in Egypt, in Sudan as well, because as I mentioned, that's where our water come from, and I'm very happy because there's a conference which is held now, that was, the title of the conference is Egypt is a gateway to Africa, which is, that's really perfect, because that's mentioning exactly the ancient Egyptian foreign policy, which is 60 or 70%, the main focus was to the south, not to the north. And I think that if we come with a lesson with the history, with the deep history between ancient Egypt and ancient Nubia, that is the most important history. We have much more interest, and we have much more reasons to have a strategic relationship with Nubia and Sudan, not with the north.